It's hanging half 100 on them at Owen Field. Or the run rules on the diamond at Lowe's Field. We're giving you the breakdowns, the bets, and the hot takes from the perspective of two former OU Athletics employees. You're listening to the Mainline Podcast with Tyler Burton and Adam Jaquez.
Let's go! Let's go! Go!
Let's go. Welcome back to the Main Line. I'm Adam Jaquez. He's Tyler Burton. Today we're talking about our 5 questions for Brent Venables and the Sooners team as a whole as they head out to SEC Media Days 1 week from today. And then we couldn't help ourselves. We got a couple extra bonus questions that we'll throw in at the end as well. But before we jump in, Tyler, how are you this evening?
I'm good, Adam. First official episode of the Mainline Podcast as a member of the Southeastern Conference. So we're officially an SEC pod now. That feels a little bit different. But yeah, things are good, Adam. Obviously, it was nice having the week off. Hope everybody had a safe and fun 4th of July. Hope you had a chance to eat some good food, have a few nice beverages, enjoy some time with friends and family. But yeah, Adam, things are good out here. We're 52 days away from kickoff happening here on August the 30th. Oklahoma taking on Temple on a Friday night. The only bad part, Adam, and I talked about this a little bit earlier with you. I know that everybody out there, they're super excited about this new game that's going to be coming out 1 week from today. EA Sports NCAA Football 25. I've had this Xbox. I bought it a couple of years ago, went to pre-order this game about a half hour or so ago, only to find out that the Xbox console that I do have is not compatible with the EA Sports game that's coming out next week. So real gut punch. I'm trying to figure out a way to bounce back from that, trying to figure out a way to raise about $400 or $500 to purchase a new console. If anybody's out there has got some ideas, feel free to let me know. Let's keep it legal. Let's keep it safe. But yeah, Adam, outside of that, we're 52 days away from kickoff, and we got media days coming up here in less than a week's time. So let's go.
Yeah, it definitely feels like the football season's right around the corner. We're less than 2 months away. I spend most July 4th up with my in-laws in the great state of Michigan, the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. And there were several days where it was below 65 degrees outside. So you just felt like the coolness of the air, and you're like, there should be a football game on right now somewhere, but there wasn't. So it definitely gave me that feeling. And now it's SEC Media Days in Dallas coming up 1 week from today. We're going to have our immediate reaction to that next Tuesday when that actually occurs. But we thought a good way to kind of preview that and get ready for it is kind of our big 5 questions that if we were there, we wanted to get answers from Brent Venables. And really, we'll just kind of run through these 5. I think the first one here, we have it listed there on the side for those watching on YouTube. But, you know, what does Brent expect as far as, you know, is it going to be an advantage for existing teams in the SEC going up against these new players in the conference? Or is there going to be an advantage for some of the newer teams coming in that maybe Tennessee's not as familiar with Oklahoma, LSU's not as familiar with Oklahoma, and so on and so forth? Yeah. And we have some sample size for this. We know what Missouri and A&M did. We know what like Syracuse and Pitt did when they went to the ACC and everyone changed conferences. But for the most part, it's a very small sample size. Most teams kind of did roughly what they did the year before. A&M is the one exception there where they jumped up with plus 4 games in the win column when they transitioned to the SEC. Now, of course, that also coincided with Johnny Manziel coming in and leading them at quarterback there, jumping from Ryan Tannehill to Johnny Manziel is a pretty big difference there. So, you know, I just don't think anyone really knows based off history, but I would love to hear what Brent's perspective is from that.
Yeah, it's a really good question, Adam. I think that all that you can do when you try to, really dissect this and try to answer, is it more advantageous to be a new member, the new kid on the block, or to be a team that's been a part of this conference for quite some time? And I think that when you go back 12 years ago to when Missouri and Texas A&M joined the SEC, it was kind of a roller coaster experience for both of these programs in the first 3 seasons. In Missouri, obviously at the time was led by Gary Pinkel. They went 2-6 in the SEC in their first year. They followed it up with a couple of back-to-back 7-1 seasons in the SEC, earning them an opportunity to play in Atlanta for the SEC championship game. And, everybody knows about Texas A&M. They kind of came out of the gate swinging in year 1, going 6-2 in the SEC. Everybody remembers the win against Alabama in Tuscaloosa. But the following 2 seasons, they were either 500 or slightly worse. So, and again, this was with the greatest player in school history playing quarterback for Texas A&M. So I get the urge to want to look back at history to try and project what Oklahoma is going to be able to do entering as a new member. But I do think it's safe to say that Oklahoma is not going to be able to sneak up on anybody, unlike Missouri and A&M more other members of the league just simply, I don't think, respected their football programs, especially compared to Oklahoma as far as their ability to be competitive. So Oklahoma enters the SEC as the winningest program in college football in the modern era. So teams in the SEC, they're going to try and prove a point against Oklahoma these first couple of seasons. Obviously, the schedule makers didn't do the Sooners any favors whatsoever. I believe that most sites out there think that Oklahoma has a top 5 most difficult schedule in the country, especially top 2 in the SEC. So, with this kind of being the inauguration year of big boy football, for lack of a better term, I think that this is going to be a really good test for Oklahoma. And I think another thing, Adam, curious to get your thoughts on this. Something else that I think is working against Oklahoma is their offense. And the expectation is that they're going to be really good. Obviously, if the offensive line comes together, we think that this Jackson Arnold high-powered offense has a chance to be really special. But this is going to be an Oklahoma offense that is not going to be anything that these SEC type defenses haven't seen before. We know that with the SEC, if you want to go back to as far as a decade ago, it was kind of predicated upon running the football. A lot of 12 personnel, lining up, trying to run you over. But ultimately, the SEC kind of adapted with the times, and I think that Texas A&M maybe kind of started the ball on this with Johnny Manziel and Cleve Kingsbury, to where they kind of moved towards that spread offense. And as much as we like Joe John Finley and Seth Luttrell, it is going to be a little bit different for Oklahoma this year. But I don't think that that's going to be something that's going to be an advantage for the Sooners when they go up against these SEC defenses this year. But again, I don't believe Oklahoma is going to have a schematics advantage offensively when they line up against the likes of Alabama and Ole Miss and LSU. But I do think in this instance, the existing teams in this conference, they do have a leg up, especially because their rosters have been tailored to fit this style of play, and they have a little bit more competitive depth across the board compared to most teams outside of the conference.
Yeah, I think that's a good point of like when Missouri and A&M went to SEC a decade or more ago, they were a curveball in that league. Now,
Sure.
the Big 12 of last year versus SEC of today, there's not that much difference in terms of like style of play. So it's not like, Tennessee's going to see something that they've never seen before when they come to town on September 21st. So it's not the same in that manner. I don't think that Oklahoma is going to have any particular advantage being the new kid on the block here. I know a lot of people, look at Oklahoma and they almost treat OU as if it's TCU joining the Big 12 or, BYU joining the Big 12, for example. And these teams coming from smaller conferences, less resources, jumping up to a power conference level. And there's an adjustment period. It takes years and years for them to figure that out. And really, that's not the case. Like Oklahoma is the biggest brand, the best program that has changed conferences in, I don't know how many years, 30 years. Like, we probably got to go back to like Penn State joining the Big Ten, really. Miami joined the ACC in the early 2000s, but Oklahoma's bigger than Miami. So this is unusual to kind of have this transition of such a power program that has rich history, that has won in every decade, every era of college football, across multiple coaches, across multiple styles of play, across multiple rule sets. No one's seen a behemoth like Oklahoma change conferences before. But, I think and I know Stuart Mandel, some people may have seen this. He came out with an article last week where he basically said, well, Oklahoma's situation is worse in the SEC than it was in the Big 12, simply because, well, they're not going to win the conference championship as much. And that kind of frustrates me because like winning conference championships will mean so little in the new college football because 4 or 5 teams from the SEC are going to make the playoffs. So that won't be the goal anymore. It'll be a nice to have, but it won't be the goal.
I don't necessarily disagree with that to an extent, because I do think that you can make the argument that where Oklahoma was at in the Big 12, yes, it was nice winning all of those conference championships. Yes, it was nice winning 10, 11, 12 ball games a year. But I think, ultimately at the University of Oklahoma, with what our goals, what we set our sights on, it's a national championship. That's the level of expectation when you sign up to play football at the University of Oklahoma in Northern America. And I think that, even though Oklahoma has, ran the Big 12 for the entirety of its tenure there, for where Oklahoma wants to be able to ultimately winning a national championship, Oklahoma was not going to be able to do so under the current trajectory that they were in. The way that they were managed, the way that they were coached, the way that they were, recruiting, simply because the SEC gives you a leg up in all of those departments. Now, on the flip side of it, it is a lot more tougher competition from top to bottom. You're not going to go out there and, expect to win 10 or 11 ball games each and every season. We hope that that's the case. We hope that Oklahoma turns into an Alabama or a Georgia. That remains to be seen. I think that they've got the right head ball coach behind the wheel right now, steering the ship. But I don't think that that's too fair or too far of kind of an off the wall take there, just simply because this is a huge transition that Oklahoma is going to be making the jump from the Big 12 to the SEC. But I do think that even though there is going to be some growing pains, there is going to be a learning curve. I think that for where Oklahoma wants to be able to get to competitively, back to winning national championships like we've grown accustomed to here at OU, this was the best move, and this is ultimately going to pay huge dividends for this program going forward.
Number 2 on our big questions for SEC Media Days next week is, does Oklahoma have the depth to really finish the season strong? Because we, especially specifically on the defensive side of the ball, we saw a great first half of the season from the Oklahoma defense last year against Cincinnati, against Iowa State, against Texas, and the rest of the non-conference teams. But then after that, UCF kind of ran you down a little bit. TCU ran all over you, scoring 45 points. I think even when you went out to Provo against BYU, not a very good Cougars team, but they were gashing the Oklahoma defense. Now, credit to Oklahoma because Billy Bowman, Danny Stutzman, lots of guys getting turnovers and really making game-changing plays on that defensive side of the ball. That's still progress on the defensive side, but overall, you saw a little bit of a drop-off, and I think there's probably a depth concern there. So my question for Brent there is, like, have we filled out all the holes that we need to a point where we can say, hey, when we line up mid-November against Missouri, for example, is there going to be a drop-off in the quality of defense that we saw versus what we see maybe in game 4 or 5 against Tennessee and Auburn?
Oklahoma to start the year gave up 16.1 points per game through the first 7 weeks of the season. That equated to a perfect 7-0 record. Over the final 6 weeks of the season, including the bowl game against Arizona, Oklahoma's defense gave up 28.3 points per game, equating to a 3-3 record overall to finish ultimately at 10-3. So again, you make a good point there, Adam. I think that if you were to put some truth serum in Brent's cup, is he happy with where Oklahoma is right now? Does he think that Oklahoma is where they need to be to, go in there and, be one of the top 3 or 4 programs in the country, go in there and win a national championship over the next year or two? I think that he would probably say no. It's not like what he was accustomed to where, he ultimately knows what the blueprint looks like from his time in Clemson. We'll talk about that here in just a little bit, but I know that Brent is definitely very encouraged, and he feels a lot better about the current state of the program, the current state of the roster, the talent, and the development of his players compared to when he got here 3 years ago. So again, do I think that we have the competitive depth right now to not see a drop off in production? I would say that I think that we are the deepest that we have ever been on defense at the linebacker and corner and safety positions, but there's still another level that we've got to get to, particularly up front, whether it's the edge position, whether it's on the interior. Now, make no mistake about it, we've got the guys to be able to do this over the next year or two, but Oklahoma, unfortunately, kind of with attrition and the NFL draft, Oklahoma kind of finds themselves in a situation where Miguel Chavis and, Todd Bates, they're going to be relying on a lot of guys outside of Demonic Williams and, Ethan Downs that really haven't played a ton of football. And here you are going into the SEC conference where you're going to be forced to, play a 13, 14 game season against, some of the most physical teams in all of college football week in and week out. So we'll see how it holds up, but make no mistake about it, Brent, I'm sure he's not entirely happy with where Oklahoma is at right now, but he's got to feel very encouraged because he knows that the current trajectory that he's got this program going on right now, completing another recruiting cycle here in the next 4 to 5 months. I think that, Oklahoma is definitely on the right path.
I think there's probably 3 or 4 guys that will answer this question throughout the year. And it's R. Mason Thomas, it's Caden Woolard, it's Grayson Holton. I think those are kind of your 3 guys that you look at and you go, okay, and probably throw in PJ Adebawore in there as well, because these are all guys that in theory we love. We've said great things about all of them over the last 7-8 months or so. We've seen some flashes from some of them on the field. With Caden Woolard, for example, playing at Miami, we think he looks great, coming from where he is, but he hasn't proven it yet on a Power 5 level yet. So if any or all of those guys are rotational at minimum and effective, if not already starting for that defensive line, then I think that tremendously changes everything, because last year we didn't have that. We had Ethan Downs, who we know what he is. he's more than reliable. I think that is kind of saying he's reliable is kind of sounds negative because he's better than that. But we know what he is. We know we're going to get production out of him, but he can't do it alone. We need other guys to step up from that. We've got DJ Terry kind of in that same area. Dominic Williams coming from TCU. We think he's going to be pretty good. He's at least proven something at a power level. So we just need more guys to step up and have that overall depth, because I think we had a lot of guys like R. Mason Thomas, unfortunate due to injury, but other guys that just were young or hadn't panned out just yet. They were still good in theory, but hadn't made it there yet.
I think the biggest problem that Oklahoma's had defensively, especially compared to some of the early 2000 teams, during Brent's first stay here at Oklahoma, Oklahoma just simply over the last couple of seasons, they haven't had a consistent difference maker coming off the edge, a guy that can get after the quarterback on 2nd and long, 3rd and 7, a guy that can essentially impact, a game just based off of what he's able to do alone as a pure pass rusher. Oklahoma, we haven't had an Obo or Nick Benito or an Eric Stryker the last couple of seasons since Brent Venables has been able to, take the reins over here in Norman. Now, make no mistake about it, when everybody's fully healthy and we talk about an R. Mason Thomas, we talk about a PJ, Caden Woolard, I think that those guys have all the physical tools to be able to do this. It's just a matter of, can they put everything together and be able to go out there against some of the best, left and right tackles in college football? Because when Oklahoma, when they take on Alabama, when they go to Baton Rouge, when they go to Oxford, you can't just simply rely on playing base defense, or you can't win football games by having to send 2 to 3 extra guys. You've got to be able to get a guy that's out there on the edge, put him out there on an island against the tackle, and trust that he's going to be able to beat his man and get after the quarterback. So I think that kind of transitions us right into this next question here that I would have for Brent. And this kind of goes back to, from his time at Clemson, winning a couple of national championships, Brent had to essentially take out the SEC's top dog to do that, whether it was in the semifinal, whether it was in a national championship. So from a roster and a talent standpoint, what did it take at Clemson, and where is Oklahoma right now going into this season compared to those teams of the past? And for me, Adam, it's pretty damn simple. Starts at the line of scrimmage on the defensive side of the football. Clemson, when Brent was there, had elite talent on the line of scrimmage. Christian Wilkins, 3-time All-American. Dexter Lawrence, All-American. Cleveland Farrell, 2-time All-American. Vic Beasley, 2-time All-American. Guys that are Pro Bowl type players in the NFL right now and are signing, 8-9-figure contracts. Oklahoma just simply hasn't been able to do that over the last, decade or so. Maybe going all the way back to Nick Benito and Obo and all that. So again, while I do think that Oklahoma has got some nice pieces along the line of scrimmage on the defensive side of the football, there's still another level in terms of recruiting. You've got to be able to go out there and get those elite guys like Oklahoma has unfortunately missed out more often than not over the last decade or so. But I think that that's where Brent would say that that's the biggest difference right now between where this Oklahoma program is compared to those teams he had at Clemson when they were winning national titles.
Yeah, I think roster-wise, the defense is starting to look a lot more like Clemson. They're probably not all the way there, but I think they're getting pretty close. And I think the experience factor closes that gap quite a bit. It's, for me, the big question I have. I think there's NFL wide receivers out there. Jackson Arnold, I mean, we don't know what he's going to be, but, on paper, you couldn't ask for much more. A former 5-star quarterback that seems to be living up to the hype throughout, practice and what we get out of, reports from behind the scenes. Running back, you probably want some more talent in that room, but overall, that's a position I think you can live with, as far as what it is. It's really the offensive line that is kind of the biggest question mark. And what's interesting is that I'm looking at Clemson's draft history. Take it with a grain of salt, it's Wikipedia, but from 2015 all the way through 2019, not a single offensive lineman drafted. And then in 2020, they had a pair of guards drafted. They had a guard drafted the next year. I don't know if not a single offensive tackle drafted from Clemson, or even a center since 2015. So that's interesting to me. I don't know what that means necessarily, because I know Brent didn't have anything to do with the offense over there at Clemson. We know Bill Bedenbaugh, he's probably got an NFL offensive lineman or two on the roster right now that's going to start this year. That's just how he rolls. So I don't know. That's kind of interesting to me that Clemson was able to win so many championships without any offensive lineman really getting drafted. That's I
Well,
don't know what that means, but that's an interesting fact.
it also helps. It helps. Yeah, it helps when you've got Deshaun Watson and Trevor Lawrence
That too.
back there taking snap. That can hide some deficiencies. But Adam, you had a good question listed on here. Talk to us about Zac Alley. Something that this is a lot something that Oklahoma fans and media guys haven't been able to talk to Zac yet. But there's a lot of reasons for excitement now that he's a part of this defense.
He's been the defensive coordinator for 7 months, 6 months, and we haven't heard from him. But it's interesting. Everyone's talking about, well, he's Brent Venables' right arm essentially, and I really want to know, like, what will that mean for Brent? What does that mean for him, and how he coaches on a game day, how he coaches throughout the week, how he's preparing, so on and so forth. Like, what is he doing in practice? Where is his focus now? Because I hearken back to the press conference that happened after the Bedlam game last year. And in that game, there was a flag thrown. It was a penalty on the coach's sideline interference. It was probably a ticky-tack flag. It probably
It was a
shouldn't have been
chicken
thrown.
shit call.
It probably was.
It's called spade a spade.
It probably was. But still, it was like, what, the third penalty of that kind that had been called all year against Oklahoma. And
Yeah.
Brent got out there and basically said, hey, like, we don't have the margin for that type of error. Now, this team is better. 2024 is going to be a more deeper team, a more talented team than 2023. So there will be some of that built in, but the competition also gets better at the same time. But I just keep thinking back to that of, like, how do you let something so avoidable like that happen, especially when you're the coaching staff? You're supposed to be the most disciplined part of the entire team. And by the way, Brent presents himself to media, to the fans, he does have that discipline. It kind of befuddles me as to, like, how does that happen, and will it continue to happen? Because I think that makes such a difference. It's critical on game days, but what other mistakes like that were happening in practice or in preparation or in film study or whatever it might be? So does having Zac Alley tremendously help with Brent Venables, not just on game day, but throughout the entire week?
Zac Alley is Brent Venables 2.0. If you watch him coach, you listen to how he speaks, his mannerisms, he's what Brent Venables was 20 years ago when he got to Norman under Bob Stoops. And even though it did improve from year 1 to year 2, there were still a lot of game management issues and situational blunders that I think that if you really wanted to kind of peek behind the curtain and really kind of dive into this a little bit, there's some certain mistakes that Brent made. I think just simply because I don't want to say he didn't necessarily trust Ted Roof, but he kind of took on a bigger role than probably what he should have been doing as a head football coach. So I think that now that Zac Alley is a part of this program, and Zac grew up, learning under Brent from his time at Clemson, and having the same mannerisms, knowing the coach speak, knowing the calls of the defense, knowing this defense back and forth, just as much so as Brent does. I think that this is only going to improve Brent's ability to basically be, kind of take on the CEO role as a football coach during those 60 minutes of play, to where he doesn't have to spend, 5, 10, 15 minutes going over there and spending the entire time that the offense is on the field over there coaching up the defense. He can be a little bit more hands-on, which I think is going to help Oklahoma in a few different areas, especially in special teams, which is something that Oklahoma just simply hasn't been good enough since Shane Beamer took the job at South Carolina. So I think that this is definitely something that can only be a positive for Brent, because, if he wants to be as involved as he was the past couple of seasons, I think that the defense is going to continue to improve. But I also think that having Zac Alley on board, who is an extension of Brent Venables, I think that this is going to, make the defense that much better, but it's also going to make Brent that much better of in totality as a football coach, because he's going to be able to kind of take a step back a little bit and, look at everything, regarding his program, whether it's recruiting, coaching, admin, game day, game week, preparation type stuff. I think that this is nothing but a positive for Brent Venables. So I'm excited to see how this is going to pay off.
Yeah, you kind of wonder last year, was Ted Roof doing some things on defense that was his way that Brent they maybe didn't care for? Or was Brent totally doing everything on defense, but Ted Roof wasn't capable of implementing it in the same manner that Brent would have? And now you think, at least as of what we've heard right now, Zac Alley should be able to do everything that Brent wants the defense to do and look like and function like. And so what does that mean as far as, hey, now Brent has the ability to turn his focus towards offense and see what kind of plays Seth Luttrell is calling and be able to see from a different set of
Mhm.
view there. Hey, we're running to the left too much. Stop doing that. Like,
Yeah.
or even self-reflection on himself. Hey, I keep calling timeouts at the wrong time. Why am I doing that? Let's correct that. You just have
Mhm.
more capacity to go focus on other areas and not have to worry as much about the defense. And I think that was going to happen naturally anyway, because you're going to have more self-regulation on the defensive side of the ball. It's year 3 for Billy Bowman and Brent Venables' system. Same thing for Danny Stutzman. Same thing for Ethan Downs. So those guys were going to police their own units, their own groups. You're just going to have more guys that were going to know what to do there. So that was going to happen anyway. But now you get, like you said, Brent Venables 2.0. That should help a lot there as well.
Yeah.
How about number 5 here?
Adam. Yeah, last question that I have, Adam, for Brent Venables next weekend or next week, next Tuesday, and I'll kick this over to you. It feels like the common belief amongst the pundits and a good portion of the Oklahoma fan base that Bill Beanbo's ability to get this offensive line to gel by week 1 is going to essentially make or break this season. I think that maybe it is unfair to say, maybe it is too much to put on one position unit, but when you look at Oklahoma's roster as a whole, and you look at how how much depth they have, how much talent they have, how much experience they have on offense and defense, this offensive line can essentially be the difference between a 7-5 or even a 9-3, 10-2 type football team. So my question to Brent would be, how do you feel about your big boys up front, and what challenges face this group going into this upcoming fall?
Stepping a little bit further back from that, last offseason, Brent was talking a big game, talking about how we're going to win double-digit games, we're going to go 10 games and compete at a high level. And I think a lot of people saw that and said, oh, okay, well, he must be pretty confident talking the big talk. We're not getting a lot of that. We're not seeing a lot of Brent Venables this offseason so far. So I wonder if some of that stems from the offensive line and the concerns there, or if it's, hey, we're going to the SEC, it's new, let's, kind of keep our head low a little bit and come in and we'll disrupt after, with our play on the field. But it'll be interesting because I know he'll get questions about this next week. And the offensive line, we talked about this a few weeks ago. There's more experience and more depth there than what people think. You just won't see, like in the preview magazines, we were talking about this before we hit record, but in the preview magazines, there's a bold font there for any guys that are returning starters, and people will open their preview magazines. They just won't see that when it comes to Oklahoma's offensive line, even though those guys started basically their entire years, last 2 or 3 seasons in some cases, at other schools around the country. So it's really just about, hey, where are we fitting those pieces? I think there's 3 guys that you can say for sure, at least in my mind, I think they're solid. I think that's Jacob Sexton, left tackle. I think Branson Hickman at center there. And I think Fabici and Wewu probably at right guard there. And then it's like, well, left guard, you could go with Heath Ozaida. You might go with Troy Everett if he's healthy enough to go. And then that right tackle is probably
Garen
Darian
Hatchett as well.
Jake Taylor. That right tackle is kind of the one where it's like the biggest question mark, but it sounds like maybe Spencer Brown has started to get his feet under him a little bit and starting to look a little bit better in the workouts so far. So that could be a great thing if we can start feeling really confident there. But regardless, I think there's quiet confidence that like the pieces are there. It's just like, how do we put them in the puzzle in the right order? And that's kind of up to the coaches and the players to gel together. But overall, the cupboard's not empty.
Yeah, and I think that that's really something that Bill and maybe that's something that an offensive line coach, more often than not, has to deal with each and every season. I think that really outside of maybe a couple of years when when Baker and Kyler were on campus, Bill essentially had to figure out a way to take 7 to 8 guys and figure out how to put the best 5 on the field at all time. And I think that there's no difference in what Bill's going to have to do this year, just simply because there's a lot of guys that have played a lot of football at other places. There's a lot of guys that have been at the University of Oklahoma for multiple years now, but just essentially haven't had any meaningful reps in a game whatsoever. So even though that's the case, there is a lot of talent. There is a lot of experience. The unfortunate thing for Bill Beanbo, and maybe unfortunate is the wrong word, but Oklahoma, we were afforded the luxury of being able to spend the first 5-6 weeks of the regular season figuring out what our best offensive line starting group is, what's the best 6-7 man rotation. And as long as you had that shit figured out by the second weekend of October when you rolled into Dallas, you were fine. But you don't have that luxury anymore. Tennessee's coming to Norman in week 4. Then the following weekend, you're going out to Auburn. And then, by the way, you kind of close the season out what I think is the hardest 4-game stretch in college football this year. So again, Bill Beanbo, he's an elite coach. He's an unbelievable developer of talent, but it's just a matter of, can he get those pieces put in the right place over the first couple of weeks of this season? Because when Josh Heupel and Nico and then boys from Knoxville come to town, he's got to have that group ready, because there's a couple of first-round, second-round NFL draft picks that are going to be on that front seven of Tennessee's defense that those Oklahoma's offensive line is going to have to deal with.
I would even say maybe even a week before that Tennessee game, Tulane comes to town. I know they have a new coach in John Summerall. He comes over from Troy. He's a very smart defensive mind. Tulane has loaded up over the last couple of years, at least to that group of 5 level, being very competitive, being a very dangerous team. They beat USC. They beat Kansas State a few years ago. They actually go to I think they actually host Kansas State the week before they travel up to Norman to play there. So that'll be an interesting measuring stick, because we'll be able to compare pretty quickly how well does Oklahoma's offensive line do versus Tulane compared to what Kansas State's offensive line does. So I think even in the non-conference, there's some challenging games there. Houston, their power conference team now, I think there's some ways that they might test us as well. But yeah, there's not a lot of time to figure this out. So got to get moving on that. And I guess that kind of flows really well into like our bonus question. We have 2 of them here, but our first one is just the offensive line recruiting game going on right now and kind of what's going on there, because Oklahoma misses on Lamont Rogers. Ty Haywood, the other offensive tackle that's very highly rated, seems to be turning very heavily away from OU. That one's kind of been dead for seemingly a few weeks here. Andrew Babalola looks like he's probably going the Stanford route, it seems, which always is frustrating that someone is so focused on academics when the other 97% of players don't care at all. So really it kind of comes down to, can you land Michael Fasusi out of Louisville, Texas there? And they're in a battle. Texas is going to throw everything at Fasusi to try to get him to come down to Austin, because they're in the same boat as Oklahoma in terms of striking out on pretty much everybody else so far. So you've got a Red River battle here that's going on. And Oklahoma so far has struck out on most of their elite offensive line targets over the last couple of years, save for Caden Green, who's no longer on the roster, and probably Eddie Pierre-Louis, who is going to be a true freshman. So hasn't been a whole lot of wins in that elite category.
I think the thing that stings so much about this, and what has got Oklahoma fans so anxious or, possibly on the verge of a mental breakdown, is the fact that you've got so many high 4-star, 5-star guys, offensive linemen, that are in Oklahoma's backyard. You've got guys from the state of Kansas. You've got guys from the DFW area. You're in Oklahoma's backyard. You're 2.5 hours down the road. This is a perfect situation for Oklahoma to be able to try to go in there and take 1, if not 2 of these guys to kind of be those pillars on the outside of this offensive line for the next 3 to 4 seasons. But my hand at, and we can dive into this a little bit. I don't think that there's any reason why we shouldn't kind of go down this path a little bit. My hand is about this close to pushing the panic button. And I'm not talking about the panic button as it relates to Bill Beanbo, the football coach. I'm saying that my hand is this close to pushing the panic button and having to truly take a step back and figure out how and why we're recruiting the offensive line position the way that we are, particularly from an NIL standpoint. Bill Beanbo is he's a top 2, top 3 offensive line coach in America. And it feels like, and again, correct me if I'm wrong on this, Adam, but this is just kind of the stance that I'm taking here. It feels like we rely on Bill Beanbo's ability to develop more so than wanting to exhaust all options at signing elite 5-star talent. We talked about Lamont Rogers, losing him to Missouri. There is absolutely no way that a kid from the state of Texas should be bypassing Norman, Oklahoma, and Bill Beanbo, who the University of Oklahoma has the most number of offensive linemen, making well over hundreds of millions of dollars in the NFL. There should be no reason why they're going to play football at the University of Missouri. I know that there's multiple factors that go into a kid's decision to go to a particular school over another, but when you're comparing this, you're comparing apples and oranges. Missouri is not on the same level, especially, both as a football program, but especially with offensive line track history, why kids would be bypassing Oklahoma to go up there and play for Mizzou. Ty Haywood, like you alluded to, sounds like he's going to Alabama. Andrew Babalola, it's down to Stanford, it's down to Michigan, it's down to Oklahoma. This kid's pretty damn sharp. His dad's a doctor, I believe. So in terms of academics, Stanford and Michigan, they've got the leg up on Oklahoma. Now, if you want to talk about offensive line development, Stanford versus Oklahoma, just go talk to Walter Rouse if you want to get a little bit more of a better picture of going to play from Stanford to the University of Oklahoma. Bill Beebo's got Walter Rouse on an NFL roster right now in the 2D playing, one of those tackle positions. But here's what I want to say on this, Adam. If we whiff on all four of these, and I'm talking Rogers, Babalola, Fasusi, and Ty Haywood, I don't know how you can defend Bill Beanbo, the support staff, the recruiting staff. I don't know what you can continue to do to defend him at this point. I don't care how good of a coach he is. It's a Jimmy's and Joe's game at this level in the SEC, and playing for a national championship, competing for national championships. It's a Jimmy's and Joe's game at this level and in this conference. And if you can't sign those top tier blue chip guys, then something else needs to be done to help with that process. I know that Oklahoma's got some really good players on campus right now. I know they've got a couple of guys that they really love the evaluation, the Afalava kid, Owen Hollenbeck, Ryan Foje, who's turned out to be a gem, kind of a diamond in the rough that many people didn't see a year ago. But make no mistake about it, when you're trying to knock off LSU, you're trying to be an Alabama, a Georgia, beat an Ohio State, you have to go out there and get those five-star kids at the offensive line position. You go look at what Georgia's got. Look at what Georgia has done with their offensive line classes both this year and last year. You look at the measurables. You look at the stars. You look at the talent. It's a night and day difference, and that's the uphill battle that Oklahoma's finding. So like I said, I'm not pushing the panic button on Bill Beanbo. I want Bill Beanbo to stay. He's a phenomenal football coach. But something has got to be done because there's some disconnect somewhere that is preventing us from being able to land some of these elite offensive line targets that Oklahoma needs to get where they want to go.
Yeah, and credit, for Ryan Foje, great evaluation, great getting on him early before, things really ramped up probably in his recruitment and locking that down. But yeah, overall, like just you swinging and missing in so many different directions, Nebraska, Kansas, Kansas State, Alabama, A&M, like Missouri, like all these teams just poaching guys that really are regionally closer to OU in a lot of cases. And I don't quite understand it. I'd love to know exactly like what's so interesting about Missouri or what's so interesting about Kansas State that guys are picking those programs over Oklahoma when
Nebraska.
You're closer. Nebraska. Even Alabama to some level, like if you're closer to Oklahoma, like, hey, you're going to lose some of those to Tuscaloosa, but not all of them. Like some of them will choose to be a little bit closer to home. So I don't quite get it. By all accounts, people are saying the NIL is there. It's in better shape. It's competitive. I don't know if I fully believe that quite yet, but I also know that not everybody is motivated fully by NIL compared to everything that Oklahoma has to offer. So I agree with you. Like you don't want to get rid of Bill Beanbo. Like you don't fire a guy that is one of the best developers in the game. But also like, it's kind of like, do you want a guy that's a 10 out of 10 in development, but like a 4 out of 10 in recruiting? And I'm not saying that's what Bill Beanbo is. Or would you rather have a guy who's like a 7 and a 7 in both categories? And I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. I think everything can be solved pretty easily if Michael Fasusi commits, though, here within a month or so.
Mm-hmm. Sure. But the scary thing, and I'm going to have to see it to believe it, and even if he does commit to Oklahoma, I'm not going to really believe that he's going to be a Sooner until the pen hits the paper. But NIL has changed everything. Make no mistake about it. It's a different world than we lived in 2 to 3 years ago. Yes, there was pay-for-play going on behind the scenes. It has been for decades now, but it's actually legal, and there's nobody regulating any of this shit. And I think that one of the biggest problems that Oklahoma is running into is now that Texas is kind of in the same position that Oklahoma is, where they missed out on a couple of guys that they thought they were going to land. Now Texas feels backed into a corner just like Oklahoma. And if NIL really is one of the driving factors of this game, I know that Oklahoma, I know that with the collective, with the donors, the boosters, we've made some pretty significant strides over the last couple of years. But at the end of the day, you are not going to be able to go toe-to-toe with the University of Texas, not with the oil money, not with that rich donor base, not with the size of the alumni that they have all, throwing pennies into the pot here. There's got to be something that needs to be done. And I know that especially in today's age where, if you're a 16, 17, 18-year-old kid, it's got to be hard to make the sales pitch to them that, hey, if you take less money to come to the University of Oklahoma, you're banking on the fact that we're going to get you to that first or second round draft pick. We're banking on the fact that how well we're going to develop you is going to result in you being able to sign that second NFL contract that's going to get you paid, potentially hundreds of millions of dollars. We live in a day and age now where instant gratification is one of the biggest things right now, basically in society, and even especially in today's youth, to where it's got to be very appealing, especially for some of these kids and their families, where if a certain dollar figure gets thrown out at them, then yeah, we kind of throw caution to the wind. We cast everything else to the side. That's going to be the reason why we make this decision. And it's just kind of something that Oklahoma is going to have to figure out a way to continue to adapt, continue to figure a way out to get better at this, because I know that we've made some significant strides. Obviously, Demonic Williams or Jane Jackson or David Stone wouldn't be at the University of Oklahoma, but you got to figure out a way to do it on the offensive line, because if you can't block, you can't keep Jackson Arnold upright. I don't care how good of a quarterback or how well of a stable of backs you got. It's not going to make a damn bit of difference.
We're probably 5 to 10 years away from this still happening, but I would like to see, that first generation of NIL players come back, to Oklahoma, speak to recruits after they've gone to the NFL and be able to say something like, hey, I chose to go to OU. It was, 20%, less NIL, but it paid off for me. Versus someone that, I'm not sure what the future holds for Lamont Rogers if he does end up signing with Missouri, but that might be his only payday. Maybe he's good enough. He'll go to the NFL. Maybe they have the right development there in their offensive line coaching. Maybe they don't. Maybe Lamont's not an NFL guy either way. Like, I don't know, but I think the track record for Oklahoma is pretty strong there. That, hey, it's worth taking maybe a smaller pay cut there if there is a difference in money. Maybe that wasn't it at all. Yep. Maybe it's totally he just likes the campus at Missouri better. Maybe he likes wearing black and gold. I have no idea, but that's not normal for recruits to be turning down Oklahoma to go to Missouri or Kansas State or Nebraska or something like that. So a lot of this can get better pretty quickly if Michael Fasusi chooses the Sooners, but I think it's going to be one of the most heated battles that we've seen for a recruit in a really long time.
He's got all the leverage now,
and he knows it. He knows it. Yeah,
he fair play to him. Get yours. Yeah. Fair play to him.
Yeah. I mean, this is why I don't think he's officially come out with it. There's been rumors that his commitment day is going to be mid to late August. Like, I think he knows where he wants to go, but play the game. No need to announce today or next week or anything like that. Wait till the end of August. So that brings us to our final bonus question here, which is some quarterback rankings. And I'll share this on the screen for those that are watching on YouTube, but we did our QB rankings for the SEC back in March. I think that came out March 6th for those that want to go back and watch that. But SEC Mike came out with this graphic for his quarterback rankings. I know he has Brady Cook number 1. I'm going to chalk that up as he wanted some engagement there, but he has Jackson Arnold way down number 10, which is last in terms of, I think, that category that we talked about last time of your Garrett Nussmeier, your Connor Wegman, your Nikos, and then Jackson Arnold, kind of guys that we think are the next line of big stars, but haven't really had their starting role just yet. So he's got Jackson Arnold pretty far down there. So kind of the question here is like, is this truly where Jackson Arnold ranks right now? And where does he need to finish the year in these rankings in order for Oklahoma to make the playoffs?
I do want to preface this by saying, because I went back and I listened to a little bit of the episode where, SEC Mike, and, the reason why we put this on here is because obviously Michael Bratton, really good follow on Twitter, does a good podcast. He was in Norman last weekend for, the big official welcome to the SEC party. I know that, he's been all over social media. Oklahoma fans have had a ton of engagement with him, but Mike talked about how this list that he's got here, the graph we've got up on the screen, is a projection of the end of the season, who we will all be saying is the best quarterback in the SEC. So Michael Bratton, Brady Cook is going to finish the year as the best overall quarterback in the SEC. If that's the case, you're probably looking at a top 4, maybe top 5 seed for Missouri this year, if that's the way that this is all going to shake out. Now, with how this pertains to Jackson Arnold, Adam, we went back earlier in the spring and we actually kind of did an SEC power rankings ourselves. And I want to say that we had Jackson Arnold right around that 8th spot. I think it was Jalen Milroe at 1, Carson Beck from Georgia at 2, Jackson Dart at 3, Quinn Ewers at 4, which we'll have an entire podcast episode about that. I'm still not sold on what's going on down there in Texas. Graham Mertz from Florida at 5, Brady Cook at 6, Connor Wegman from Texas A&M at 7, and then we had Jackson Arnold at number 8, ahead of Nico at Tennessee and Garrett Nussmeier from LSU. Now, here's what I want to say about Jackson. The kid has all the talent in the world. He flashed in the bowl game, made some phenomenal throws, down the field to Brennan Thompson, throwing across his body to Nick Anderson. We saw some phenomenal things from Jackson Arnold. But he also made some mistakes in taking care of the football. That's to be expected in your first, overall start as a college football player at the Division I level. This is going to be his first year as a starter with the first-year offensive coordinator at Oklahoma in Seth Littrell. The biggest question mark of any offensive line in the SEC is the one that's in Oklahoma. Are they going to be able to block for him? Are they going to be able to hold up in protection, keeping this guy clean? On the flip side, he's probably got the best wide receiver core in the SEC, bar none. I know that Ole Miss has got a good one. Texas could make an argument as well, but when you look at this thing from top to bottom, Emmett Jones's group is probably the best collection of wide receiver talent in the SEC. And even though Jackson Arnold, he's inexperienced, there's going to be some growing pains. But when he's on, he can flat out spin it. He's got one of the highest ceilings of any quarterback in the SEC. And Adam, what if the offensive line is good? What if Bill Beanbo figures it out again? If you can block for him, combined with the weapons that they've surrounded him with through the last couple of recruiting cycles, both in the high school ranks and the transfer portal, Anderson, Burks, Farouk, Gibson, Sharp, Sawchuk, Hicks, Tatum, Barnes, the skill talent is probably some of the most impressive that we've seen in Oklahoma collectively in quite some time. And let's not forget, and I'll throw this back over to you because I'm going long-winded, there's a reason why Dylan Gabriel is in Eugene, Oregon right now. Jackson is that good. Jackson is the future of this program, and I'm just excited that we finally get to see the beginning of his career unfold in 52 days' time. But where does he need to finish for Oklahoma to get where they want to be? He's got to be top 4.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Top 4, top 5. I think it won't be something that we'll be able to just stat watch throughout the year and determine, is he better than Nico? Is he better than Connor Wegman, for example? There's going to be different situations there, but I agree with you. He has potentially top 3 weapons to throw to in the entire conference here. He's going to have, I think, a top 5 defense on the other side of the ball. We talked about how, stat-wise, they're probably not exactly where they want to be last year, but they were still turning the ball over quite a bit. So Jackson Arnold's going to be set up for some really easy short drives because of that defense and the way that they're growing and continuing their depth there. And that's something when you look at what I just look at his category of Connor Wegman, Garrett Nussmeier, Nico Yamaliava, Jackson Arnold. Those are your 4 guys that are all very similar, all grouped together. And out of all those teams, he's going to have the best weapons, the best defense, and I think the best overall talent just on the team overall. So, and Garrett Nussmeier is kind of sneaky there. He's played in 18 games, a lot of mop-up duty, but he's also played, in the bowl game against Wisconsin. He played a lot against Georgia 2 years ago, I believe, was an SEC.
LSU's going to have a really good offensive line.
They will have plenty of weapons for him to throw to as well. The defense is a concern. It's still a question. They have a new defensive coordinator. They were terrible last year on defense. I think they'll be decent, but he's the one that has the most experience out of all those guys, and it's not as much starting experience. It's not enough that I would say like we kind of know what he is. And his interception to touchdown ratio is not great. It's 11-7, 11 touchdowns, 7 interceptions. So it's not great. So I don't think the story's written on him either, but I feel like out of probably those 4 guys, he probably has the lowest ceiling. But yeah, Jackson Arnold, he should be able to pass most of the guys on the list that are ahead of him in terms of like guys like Brady Cook, guys like Graham Mertz, who we know what they are as college quarterbacks. Like, I think they've kind of maxed out what they are. Brady Cook had one of the best receivers in college football last year and still only threw for 21 touchdowns. Like, they kind of are what they are. I don't think there's a whole lot more ceiling there. They have a really high floor. They're good players. Jackson Arnold definitely is starting below those guys right now. But by the end of the year, with what he has projected and the weapons he has around him and the team he has around him, he should finish above some of those guys for sure.
One of the other things that's working against Jackson Arnold, especially compared to some of these guys that are ranked above him, It's the schedule that he's playing. This,
Yeah.
like we've talked about it, and we'll continue to talk about this as we get closer to doing our season preview and giving our full predictions on what we think Oklahoma's going to be able to do this year. But it's a gauntlet that Oklahoma's got this year with some of the teams and the defenses that they're going to be facing. And when looking at this list that Mike put up here, Brady Cook at the number 1 position, Missouri cupcake schedule, Jackson Dart at Ole Miss. They got a couple of good games, some very manageable schedule. He too is surrounded by an abundance of riches. Carson Beck at Georgia. It's Georgia. It's Kirby. He's going to figure it out. Quinn Ewers, okay. Jalen Milroe,
schedule.
yeah. Cupcake schedule. There it is again. But yeah, you look at this, Adam. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Jackson Arnold's going to face 5 quarterbacks ranked ahead of him this season. It's going to be a hell of a lot of fun to watch.
Yeah, there'll be some duels for sure. Final thoughts here before we jump off for the evening. I didn't have this on the outline, but Mike Gundy made some noise at Big 12 Media Days out in Las Vegas. That's the high water mark of the season for Oklahoma State, in my opinion. They will not be talked about more than they were today and probably tomorrow. And I feel like, I don't know, it's kind of low-hanging fruit to just knock on Oklahoma State. But, I mean, their biggest moment, I don't think they may have a Friday or Thursday night game where they'll kind of be in the spotlight for all of college football, but they will be at best like the 10th best game of the day most weeks. There won't be much reason to talk about Oklahoma State. So this feels like the high water mark for really any Big 12 team at this point. It's kind of frustrating. It's kind of sad as like just a fan of college football that there's another conference that no one's respecting. People are calling them, the most like interesting conference because all teams are relatively the same, but I think that kind of works against them in a lot of senses because who's the bad guy? Who do you root against like you do against Georgia or against Ohio State? So yeah, this just feels like the high water mark for Oklahoma State. Just figured I'd throw that.
Well, I mean, it's typical. It's an annual event. You put a camera in front of him at Big 12 Media Days. Mike Gundy is going to say something off the cuff that's going to result in a lot of national media attention. Some of it might be questionable. Obviously, the one today was a little bit when he commented on Ollie Gordon. But we'll just kind of leave that there. But yeah, I think that the Big 12 as a whole, it definitely, it's not going to be the best brand of football that's played each and every Saturday, but I think that it has an opportunity to be one of the most competitive leagues, one of the most competitive conferences, just because there's a lot of teams that are all right there in that, on the same level as one another. But make no mistake about it, I do think that there's levels to this when it comes to the cream rising to the top. And I think that this is Utah's conference to lose.
Yeah.
I just hope that this is kind of I don't want to say an eye-opening moment for Oklahoma State fans, because kind of in a sense, you are an irrelevant program right now. And
I mean, the whole Big 12 really is.
The whole Big 12 really
until
is.
Utah or Kansas State goes to the playoff like 4 out of 5 years and beats an SEC team there. There's no foothold to stand on.
And I hate to say it, but I mean, correct me if I'm wrong here. People really only tuned in to watch Oklahoma State when they were playing OU or they were playing Texas.
Yeah,
I really don't think that's much of an argument that you can make. So, but we'll see. Obviously, they've got Alan Bowman back. They do have a couple of their tougher matchups at home this year. So we'll see what happens. But yeah, at the end of the day, Mike Gundy stole the show. Just wasn't necessarily for the right reasons.
Yeah. And none of that conversation, like, I don't want to put down the Big 12. Like, there's lots of good fans, lots of good teams out there. It's just like, it's the reality of the situation. And I don't love it for college football, but like, put OU on your schedule, OSU. Stop being a chicken about it and put OU on your schedule so you can have your spotlight game. And it's better for both programs. It's better for college football.
How are they going to sell season tickets now without OU on their schedule?
I mean, it's going to be real interesting to
we'll save that
go
for
see them
day.
play Iowa State and West Virginia all the time. So, well, that'll do it.
As they beat Colorado, we're fine.
That's right. That'll do it for us here on the main line. Next week, we're going to have immediate reactions to SEC Media Days and everything that the players, Brent Venables, are saying there in Dallas. So join us next week. Make sure you're subscribed, give us the 5 stars, whatever you do there. And we'll see everyone next week for the next episode of The Main Line.